Thank you for coming, Judy Barr.
Hello, I'm Judy Barr, a member of the Board of Directors of the Wellesley Conservation Land Trust. Welcome to the second in a series of our educational webinars presented by that Conservation Land Trust. This webinar is co-sponsored with the Wellesley Free Library, Sustainable Wellesley, and the Town of Wellesley's Natural Resources Commission. We thank all of you for your support in promoting this event. And thanks so much for those that are attending. The Wellesley Conservation Trust is your local, private, nonprofit land trust. We were founded in 1958. We have 10 sanctuaries. 5 of these have trails and 3 are interconnecting. If you look at the map of Wellesley in the lower left corner, the southwest corner, Susan Lee connects with the Hale Trail along Winding River Road. And these then connect via the Aqueduct Trail to the 1-mile circular trail on our Guernsey property, a beautiful 25-acre sanctuary that includes Lake Sabrina in that southwest corner of Wellesley. Other properties with trails are Pickle Point, which is a trail that's on a peninsula extending into Morris's Pond on the east side, and Cronk's Rocky Woodland, a spring wildflower beauty in the middle of College Heights in the residential area. Please get outdoors and enjoy them all. Tonight, our topic is problems with invasive shrubs. Identify, remove, and replace, presented by Cricket Vlass. Cricket has been with the town's Park and Tree Division, a unit of Wellesley Department of Public Works, since the summer of 1980, when she was hired to assist with the tree inventory. For 37 years, she's been the town of Wellesley's landscape planner and horticulturist. Cricket holds degrees from the University of New Hampshire and Radcliffe seminars, and certifications as a Massachusetts arborist and as a landscape professional. This webinar is the Wellesley Conservation Land Trust's first multimedia effort. And to do that, we needed a videographer. We thank Simon Glassenberg, a student at the Dexter Southfield School in Brookline, for his expertise as a videographer in this effort. He filmed Cricket's in-field portions at our Guernsey Sanctuary in December. And tonight, Cricket is adding additional information live from her home. You'll see that we'll transition back and forth between videography and live presentations. And we'll start with Cricket being live. This webinar is being filmed. It lasts approximately 45 minutes and will be followed by a question and answer period. Since we are using mute right now, if you will enter any questions in the chat function at the bottom of the screen, we'll answer them. Cricket will answer them at the end of her presentation. There are 3 additional talks in the Wellesley Conservation Land Trust series that are scheduled at this time. There are 2 that Joy Marzoff will be giving on vernal pools, the early vernal pools, and then in April, later vernal pools. And depending on weather and whether they cooperate, we're going to have one on the skunk cabbage, which is an amazing plant. So please check our website for updates, our Facebook pages for additional information. And now to Cricket and this evening's talk. Cricket.
Thank you so much, Judy. Let's see. There we are. Thanks so much for inviting me into your homes tonight to talk about what is really definitely a difficult subject. And I am impressed that as many more people wanted to hear about this, because it can be A little depressing, but I promise I'm not going down that road tonight. I'm going to try to be positive and say we can do something about this. So we're going to talk about invasives and their identification, their management, and hopefully how we can possibly replace them with some beautiful natives. So let's first start off with the definition though. We got to know what an invasive is, and it's a species that's defined as a species that is a non-native to an ecosystem and whose introduction causes economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. It's pretty serious stuff. So there's a lot of invasives in our world, certainly insects, diseases, any manner of flora and fauna. But today we're just going to be talking about shrubs. This is a massive subject, so we're trying to drill down on some of the woody shrubs that we have, and 6 in particular. So, why should we care about invasives? Things are green, things are growing, the birds are eating, everything's pretty good out there, right? Well, unfortunately, without being able to, if you can't identify the difference between plants that we really want there and ones that we don't, it can be an issue. And the issues are that, first of all, invasives have become invasives because they've come from someplace else and they're here and they don't have any natural enemies to keep them in check. Certainly not all plants that come from elsewhere become invasive, but these ones are the ones that we're talking about tonight have become. They tend to grow and mature rapidly. They spread quickly. They do that by producing a lot of seed. They can thrive in all kinds of conditions: sun, shade, sandy, clay, wet, dry. So they're very adaptable. Can be very difficult to control. They can cause harm to the environment or our economy, which is unbelievable. They invade natural habitats. I don't mean to be reading this, but I just want to be able to say all these things out loud because it's important. They outcompete other plants for resources such as light, water, nutrients, and space. And it goes on and on. We could talk about a lot more, but let's get going on some ID. So why me tonight? I have been, as I said, been here since 1980 as a land manager. Certainly when I started back in the 80s, invasives were around. They've been around for a long time, but they certainly were not the issue that they've become now. And as a land manager, I'm finding that most of so much more of our time right now is being spent on trying to manage invasives. And it's very hard because they take an enormous amount of resources. So we're focusing, as I said, on 6 shrubs. The situation with invasives is getting worse. And a lot of times people will come with plans to say, oh, well, we're going to get in and we're going to take out all the invasives and we're going to replant natives and it's going to be great. And I always say, yeah, but it's forever. The management of that is forever. It's in perpetuity. And that's the hard thing to get our brains around. But here we go. It's a challenging subject. If you can't identify any of them now, I can guarantee you they're in your yard. You just haven't found them yet. And what we're really looking for is balance in our landscapes. We're never going to completely get rid of invasives. It's never going to happen. But we need to find some balance in that. So hopefully some of this information tonight will help you to get there. And if you're not familiar with Doug Tallamy, I'm going to quote him a few times in this talk. And he has written a couple wonderful books, one called Bringing Nature Home. And that book was able to really kind of coalesce these ideas around, invasives and how we can, encourage natives and what we want to see in our yards. And it's not like he is the first one that's been writing about that. He just did such a good job in doing it. So I would highly suggest getting any of his books. But I'm going to quote him here by saying, like it or not, well, I also want to say, if you go on the internet looking for information about invasives, you will find a ton of information. Some of it will be helpful. Some of it may even counteract what I'm saying here today. But what I'm trying to give you is my experiences on how we've dealt with things here in Wellesley. And so Doug will say, like it or not, gardeners have become important players in the management of our nation's wildlife. It is now within the power of individual gardeners to do something, and that we all dream of doing to make a difference. In this case, the difference will be the future of biodiversity to the native plants and animals of North America and the ecosystems that sustain them. So this is what, we could talk about a lot of different aspects of invasives, but I'm just going to drill down on one for a few minutes here, which will take birds, because birds, I think most of us would say we want them in our yards. We love seeing them. And let's look at how they connect with invasives. So this is what you want to see, is birds coming in and eating the fruits of a native plant, such as staghorn sumac, because birds feed on insects that feed on native plants. And native plants are the things that provide the food sources, because they've co-evolved with the birds and the insects. And unfortunately, invasive plants have not co-evolved with the native insects, pollinators, and our birds. And there is the rub. So this is what you want to see, a beautiful native eastern bluebird eating a caterpillar and going back and finding foraging on a native plant and bringing it back to feed its young. And that's, a bluebird brings its to its nest one of the many thousands of insects needed to raise its babies. It's a very important thing to deal with the plants that have co-evolved. So what we oftentimes see is that poor same eastern bluebird sitting on a tree. Fortunately, it's not eating all of the bittersweet berries that's surrounding it, but it will be tempted. So native plants, the fruits and seeds provide proteins and lipid levels appropriate for birds to feed their young. And that's why it's so important to be focusing on the natives. And unfortunately, just like humans, birds often prefer the fruits of invasive plants, unfortunately, because they have higher level of carbs. So just like humans, birds often go for the candy bar. And while candy bars are okay, we all enjoy a candy bar now and then. We can't live on them. And so making sure that the birds have the plants on which to feed are very, very important. So this is, this right here, cedar waxwing, is feasting on privet seed, which has also become an invasive. So as I say, we cannot eliminate invasive plants, but hopefully we can reduce some of the impact on the landscapes that we have. So I think right now we're going to share the first clip.
I bet you're wondering why we're here in the Guernsey Sanctuary in the middle of winter talking about invasives. Well, the winter time I find is a fabulous time to do invasive management. Somebody said to me the other day, it's a shame it's winter and can't get out and do it. And I feel very differently about that. I think it's a great time to get out and do invasives, because first of all, we generally have more time on our hands then. We're not doing all the other amazing things that we have to do as gardeners. And then we also don't have to deal with the bugs, which is wonderful. Fewer ticks around. I don't know about you, but I hate mosquitoes. So this is a great time to get in here. And it also gives us a strong clarity of the individual plants themselves. And we can actually look at the structure and the bones of the plants. And I think it makes it a little bit clearer as to what we're doing. Without all the leaves there to get in the way. So today we're here to talk about 6 different invasive plants. The first one I want to talk about is euonymus, or burning bush. Most people know it more as burning bush. Its botanical name is Euonymus elatus, but it's a plant that we certainly know from most of our landscapes. It's everywhere. People love it for that beautiful fall color. And the problem is, not only do people love it, so do the birds. So they love to come and eat the seeds. We're going to see, we get a little close up here. There's a small fruit still laying there. That is just the casing of the fruit. but inside were the seeds, and the birds tend to love it, eat it, go fly away, do their elimination somewhere else, and then down come the seeds. And because of these plants, we're talking about invasives, they are incredibly good at what they do, which is growing. These plants can, the seeds can go down and pretty much germinate just about anywhere. Euonymus elatus, most people know it as burning bush. And to identify it properly, what we're going to look at is a couple features, and they're very distinctive on Euonymus, which is great. So what we have on the branches are, first of all, you'll see on the branches, there's a strong color of green. Not all plants look like that in the wintertime. Actually, most of them are beiges and browns. So if you look closely at the stem, you're going to see a nice green color coming through. There are other plants that have that green as well, but very, very few plants have these, what are just almost corky wings that come off. This plant in here has some large ones, which is great for identification purposes. Don't be surprised though if you go along and see a plant that has much shorter, very small corky wings. They're there, they're just not as distinctive. So those are going to be your main features for identification in the wintertime for Euonymus. You might also see the leftover seed casing here. It's small, inside were the seeds, and this is what's left over. Eventually that will fall off as the winter goes along, and there'll be less of that opportunity later in the winter and into spring.
Okay, well, here's a few more pictures that I hope will kind of, the video was a challenge. You know, we're trying to do this during the time of COVID. So me without a mask and trying to do this thing. So I thought I'd bring up a few more pictures to be able to show you some more of the identifying features of the burning bush. It's well known as a foundation planting. It's tough as nails. It grows in a place where it doesn't have a lot of soil volume, hot, sunny, all kinds of different conditions. So you see here a little bit more of a close-up with the corky wings, this beautiful fall color. This is a good example. Oh, and also the green. You see that green underneath, very distinctive. This one also has the green, but you can see very small cork wings right there. And here's the fruit with the capsule that at the beginning of winter, you might see a little bit of that left over. And this plant picture down here on the left-hand side is fortunately not in Wellesley, but I could tell you that we have a place that looks similar to this in Centennial Park, where the plant has the ability to grow in full sun or dense shade. And it's unfortunately taking over the forest floor here. And that is a common event. So what is a native plant? I want to talk to you about the positive things that we can do is to plant some native plants, maybe once we try to figure out how to get rid of these invasives. And it's really a plant that's grown in this area and has developed over hundreds or thousands of years with the other flora and fauna that's growing in the area. So I'm going to highlight quite a few of them. Oh, one of the things is we have a handout. I just want you to be aware. We have a handout that has a number of native shrubs on it. It has the botanical and the common names of it. And the ones we're talking about in particular tonight are highlighted in bold. And so if you don't want to try to, write everything down, you have that as a reference afterwards. And we're only looking at just a few of them. There are many out there, but I'm trying to choose the ones that I think you'll like in your landscapes and will be able to be found in the nursery industry. So I wanted to let you know though, in Wellesley, we don't always use natives. We have a lot of landscapes that the soil has been really impacted. I garden on many traffic islands in town. All of those don't have native soil in them. And native plants, while they do well culturally here, sometimes the soils don't support them the way we want. And when under those circumstances, then oftentimes we will use exotic plants. Now, obviously these exotic plants come from somewhere else, but are not known to be invasive here. So there's a difference between exotic and invasive, all right? And all of the plants that we're going to talk about are grown by the Native Plant Trust. If you haven't been to Garden in the Woods in Framingham, I highly recommend going. So if you are looking for alternatives for burning bush and looking for a beautiful fall color, these are 3 options. Fothergilla, there's a couple different species of Fothergilla. There's lovely fall color and white bottle brush flowers in the spring. Aronia chokeberry, a great fruit set on it, nice small white flower in the spring and a lovely color in the fall. And then think about Virginia sweetspire, Itea. This is actually growing in front of the police station, and so very tough. It creates a colony. It's a colonizer, so it will spread and kind of make these beautiful dense patches. So. All right, we're on to our next clip.
Now we're going to talk about the big bad one of all, which is bittersweet, Celastris orbiculatus. Bittersweet has become a very serious issue, and it's an issue because of its great ability to grow to vary in all kinds of conditions, in multiple different shapes. It can grow down on the ground if it doesn't have anything to grab onto. It can grow up into trees 30 to 40 feet. And it does this in the mechanism that the fact that it's is a twiner. So when you're looking at vines and you're saying, oh, have I got bittersweet? There's many features that will help us identify it. But one of them is the way in which it twines. So a lot of vines will have different mechanisms. Like ivy will have little feet that will come up and attach to things, where the bittersweet will simply twine, and it always twines in a counterclock direction. So here you've got this one growing up from the ground. This is a small one. This is probably a year or 2 old, and it's growing up, and you see it's going in that counterclock direction, okay? Now, if this wasn't here, it would just scoot along the ground until it found something to come up. It was lucky it found something close by, and up it goes, all right? And the thing is, it just uses it as a support until it really wants to get up into the trees. And that's where bittersweet really becomes our big problem, is that when it grows up into the trees. So here it is, all through the plants. It's going over to this plant, it's going to that one, and eventually it's going to go up that big maple tree right there. All right, we've moved over to this particular bittersweet plant to show you what it can do. And I'm sure most of you are very familiar with it. But this one has been growing for many more years than that. It has come from over this direction. It has grown up on the Multiflora rose. It's gone up, and now it is way up. You can't see it, but I can tell you it's almost 40 feet into the tree up there. So what it does, will get up into the tree, and it will keep twining and twining, and eventually it can actually kill a tree and take it down. So what we want to do on management on this is to just cut it. And I'm going to take this one. Oh, look at this. Not only does it grow up on other things, but it also can grow up on itself. So it can spin and spin and give itself some structure in order to get up to where it needs to go. So I'm going to give, as far as cutting, so once again, you don't want to pull, you don't want to do it, but you do want to cut. So I want to do this. Oh, and one of the great things about us being here in the winter time is that in the summertime or in the growing season, this bittersweet would have leaves all over it. And if we wound up cutting it in that time, then all the leaves would just start to wilt, turn brown, and then hang out there for probably another 6 months. And it can tend to look really unattractive. If you cut bittersweet in the wintertime, you don't have any of that issue. Nobody will even know what'll happen. So when I cut this, now I can't get it out of the tree. It's not like I can pull it out of the tree. It's up there. It's caught up there, and it's not coming out. So what we generally do is we'll cut it low, and then we'll get on a stool or on a ladder, cut it as high as we can, and then just leave it alone. It'll take between 2 to 3 years. Little by little, the plant will start to decompose, it will fall out, and it will become a non-issue. The greatest thing is you've saved that tree. So just come in here with your saw. See if I can get a good angle here, and just simply do a cut.
Okay, so bittersweet. Oh, somebody said it was their nemesis. It is ours as well. And honestly, throughout town, our goal is not to, all our goal is, we have a simple goal, is to try to keep it out of the trees. That we'll never get rid of it, but if we can keep it out of the trees, we feel like we've had some success. The tree, bittersweet, can grow actually upwards of 60 feet. As it twines, it puts a lot of stress on the plant. It puts an enormous amount of weight on it. It gets in the way of photosynthesis. It just does so many bad things. So I just wanted this lower right picture here just shows you how big it can actually get. That's 4 or 5 inches across in diameter. A little bit better close up of the fruit. And this one, it happens to be, I was just walking around my neighborhood and there it is. It's everywhere. Tends to grow up along the edges a lot. Say along roadsides and where there's a fair amount of sun. It's always searching for that. So, oh, and this slide here shows the cutting, and there's a piece that's already come out. This was probably done the year before. In a couple, 3 years, it'll all come out. This picture here is one of my favorite, and I was astounded. So, oh, first of all, just looking at this picture over here on the right, this shows you just the strength of the bittersweet and how this small tree is actually physically deformed by it as it's growing up. But this is at Phillipsbrook Park. The grass was cut 2 weeks before this picture was taken. So the grass is 3 or 4 inches tall. See this right here? Where's my thing? Right here, boom, right here, bittersweet. That's how much it grew in 2 weeks. So when we are managing bittersweet in the grass, obviously mowing is our best option. So there is a native bittersweet vine, Celastris scandens. I have seen one. It's been a long time since I've seen it. It was probably 30 years ago. The difference is that it has its flowers up here. See, it's on the very end of the branches and the vine, and then there's the fruit also on the end. Different than, and the leaves are a little bit narrower, different than oriental bittersweet where the leaves are a little bit wider, and then the flowers actually are down in the axils of the leaves. Some alternatives for vines, looking at possibly woodbine. This is an absolutely beautiful native, great fall color, good fruit for the birds. Although look at it, it's a big plant too, that's growing up a telephone pole. So we would use this very judiciously. But another one that is a little bit more demure, you might want to think about, is the coral honeysuckle. This is one of the honeysuckles that's not invasive. It's a beautiful vine, and I have it in my yard, and the hummingbird comes by it on its tour around. And in vines, I had to put in poison ivy, just to understand that this is a plant that provides amazing fruit for the birds. It also has a beautiful fall color. We do manage it to keep it away from pathways and anywhere people would come in direct contact with it. But it is a native plant. And while it is aggressive, it is not invasive, it is native. So when we have one of those, we call it noxious. So that's what we think about poison ivy. So there we go, Mike.
Honeysuckle is another one of our problems. We have 3 different species of honeysuckle shrubs that are considered invasive here in Massachusetts. One of the things, as you can see right here, this is the shrub. The nice winter identification tool is to use is the color of the bark. It's actually quite light. You don't see a lot of shrubs this color. This is quite light, and kind of that light buff beige color. So if you see that, that's a good thing. The other thing is, oftentimes, almost always, this is growing in the shade, where other things really struggle. A lot of plants like some sun. This plant will grow in dense shade. And it can do that because it has this amazing ability to leaf out in the spring in March. So that is probably one of your best identification tools, is if you take a walk through the woods in mid-March here in Massachusetts, especially here in Wellesley, if you see a plant that has already started to leaf out, then you get this green, you're looking around, nothing else, it all still feels like winter to you, but suddenly you see a shrub with leaves on it that are coming out in the dense shade, guarantee you that is honeysuckle. And that early leafing out ability allows it to use its photosynthesis when other things aren't out, and that's what makes it one of those really very adaptable plants.
So we're talking about honeysuckle here, the Lonicera. There are 3 types that all shrub honeysuckles that are invasive here in New England. And you can see in this lower left picture that lovely light buff color. There's not a lot of other plants that have this color in the wintertime, and the bark tends to be a little bit flaky, a little bit peeling off, and good ID tool. And if you look closely, you see these little tiny green buds of leaves coming out. Here it is, probably a couple weeks later, maybe about mid-March, with this leaves coming out. And look at this down here. This is an amazing picture because this is an absolute sea of honeysuckle in dense shade in the summertime, but it's taking advantage of the leaves that haven't yet to flush out in the spring, and it gets an enormous amount of its sort of photosynthesis done then, and which is just shows how adaptable it is. A nice little flower on it, and there's the fruit. So, all right, some alternatives that you might want to think about that are natives that do well in the shade is one of my favorites. There's not a lot of natives that are evergreens here that do really well. So this is one of them, Rhododendron maximum, Rose Bay rhododendron. It is one of my all-time favorites. Flowers quite late in the season, more at the end of June than a lot of the other rhododendrons you might be familiar with. Lovely shiny foliage. Another one that if you've walked in the woods, you've probably walked right under this plant and never known it. It will grow up quite large as an understory plant. And what I love about it is these funny flowers. They're these kind of strappy like little flowers. Unfortunately, they come out in October of all times, late in the season, and they're oftentimes hidden by this beautiful fall yellow foliage. So we miss this a lot in the landscape, which is too bad. But if you're ever in the woods in the fall this time, go out, look up, you might see them. And another one is northern spicebush, Lindera. It's actually a lot more common than people, I don't think most people know about this plant, but if you're out in early spring in the woodlands and you see a kind of palish yellow green flower coming out, it may very well be Lindera, and you can identify it by giving it a scrape on the bark and smelling it. That's why it's called spicebush. It's absolutely magnificent, beautiful fall color. Right, Michael, now to the next one. Thank you.
Another invasive plant that you might be familiar with is barberry. You would be familiar possibly because it's growing in your own yard. We wind up this is a plant that the landscape industry has gone and done some hybridization on it. So while the straight species is a green leaf, There's a lot of smaller, now more compact, maroon colored leafed plants that are really appropriate for homeowners, landscapes. They're smaller. Um, they're tough as nails. They don't need a lot of moisture. They're a great, easy plant to grow in difficult conditions. Unfortunately, that also makes them possibly invasive, where they can just about grow in just about any location. So on the identification of these, what you're going to see is these red berries. They come out in the fall. These are persisting a little bit. But the other one are these small, tiny spines on it. They don't feel so tiny when you walked into it by mistake or gone to try to prune it. But it is, those spines actually make it a really nice protective area for birds to go in and hang out. But it has become a problem because the birds do eat the seeds, spread them around, and they're starting to become much more of prominent in our conservation areas. So a few more close-up pictures of the barberry. You can see the fruit nice, and the fruit will persist. Certainly the birds will eat it, but it's a great ID tool, especially for early winter when they're still hanging around. They don't seem to go quite as quickly as some of the other ones. Another close-up of the spines, and that's with the flower, just nice little dangly flower. But this is that's so distinctive is this cultivar that has this red maroon foliage. Some of them are actually gold. They did a lot of hybridization on them. And so, but the straight species, and it will revert back to it, is this green color. And once again, another picture with barberry in dense shade taken over the forest floor. And it's such a shame that it's becoming such an issue, because we've use them. Fortunately, all of these invasives that we're talking about, such like this plant here, is no longer being sold in Massachusetts. Some alternatives you might want to think about are, if you've ever had a chance to walk around Central Park, the small park up in the square near the post office, we took one of the largest bed there about 4 years ago. We started a renovation, and we really wanted to highlight native plants and just focus strictly. And I'd love to see, we're trying to do more and more of this throughout town. And I'm very pleased with the results of this. I think the landscape it's a healthy landscape. It's pleasing to my eye because every single thing in there is a native, and but it's got a lot of color and texture, and it's got trees and shrubs and wildflowers and ground covers, and it's alive with pollinators, and it's just it's become a joy to work on. And as I said, I hope we spread it more around town as we can find the ability to do. So anyways, the two plants I want to bring your attention to is the one on the right-hand side here, which is called 9-bark, Physocarpus. The straight species is green. This is a cultivar called Little Devil. And if it's allowed to grow up and cascade out and just become this lovely, relaxed, beautiful mass of color in the landscape, it's really beautiful, and it has these kind of pale pink flowers on it in the spring. And then the other plant I want to bring your attention to is the winterberry. It's Ilex verticillata. Now, the straight species of Ilex verticillata is quite large. I've seen them grow upwards of 8-10 feet in height. This particular one here is called a red sprite. It's been hybridized to be smaller, better for our home landscapes. And you do need, it is a species of plant that needs both, needs a male to pollinate the flowers. So there's fruit for the, on the females in the fall. And so this one here is called red sprite, and I use Jim Dandy
as the male. The male is a lovely plant. I just happen to really love the fruit. So we plant as many females as we can. And you'll go along and see this lower here. This is truly the fruit set that you can get on it. But I can tell you from one day to the next, they can disappear because once robins find them, they just go crazy and eat them all. These are 3 more that have proven to be just wonderful native plants, very adaptable as well. This one on the left, sweet fern, is a colonizer. So you put in a few and you'll have quite a few after that. They'll just make a mass eventually if they're happy. And they tend to love sunny, dry locations, sometimes really tough locations. And if you've ever walked by a sweet fern and known to pick a leaf off of it and smell it, it's just magnificent. Another evergreen native here is the inkberry, Ilex glabra. It is, this cultivar is compacta. The straight species can get quite tall, a little bit large for our landscapes. So I've been using this one, which is called compacta, and they are tough as nails. Inkberry is known to do well with, moist feet, but this one is very adaptable and will be in full sun and a little bit dry, and we've had a lot of success with it. And then the last one here is Ursa aromatica, or aromatic sumac. This is a sumac. Most people think of sumac with the big plumes of, red fruits on it, and they can be quite large. This is more of a creeper and a colonizer. Very, very tough, adaptable plant. I love the shiny foliage on it and the beautiful fall color of it. This is growing outside of the, just near the Hills Post Office in a terrible conditions. It's about 2 feet, the bed is about 2 feet wide, about 20 feet long, dry as a bone, sidewalk and road on one side, parking lot on the other. Just a terrible place to ask a plant to grow. And this is done beautifully. So I'm hoping that you might think about this one. It does not have any big fruit on it. It's really growing more for it's almost more like a tall ground cover. So, all right, Michael.
Another plant that's become much more of an issue around Wellesley is glossy buckthorn. It's one of those plants that doesn't have a lot of distinctive characteristics about it, so most people would just walk by it and say, oh, maybe it's a cherry or it's a something else. But it's one of those plants that has become a dominant plant in an understory in many of our parks. The duck pond for us was one of the places where about 10 years ago we realized that it had just gotten in big time, and so now we go in and cut it every year. So it's an ongoing management issue, but it's something that we feel very strongly about trying to manage this plant. And this is it right here. Not much to talk about, is there? It's the bark itself is kind of a grayish, mid-gray, very typical of many plants. The one distinguishing feature that glossy buckthorn has, first of all, it will produce a fruit. It has a black fruit about the size of a little bit smaller than a pea. But those are oftentimes gobbled up by the birds pretty soon, so it's not a great ID tool for you. But I want you to look at this. It's these right here. On the stem are these little white, they're called lenticels. They're just little white dots all over the bark. Other plants will have white dots, but this is probably the best distinguishing feature I have for this one. Glossy buckthorn generally is, especially in the shady conditions, generally it stays fairly small. But on occasion they can get quite large if they've been let go for a lot of years. Here's a slightly larger one, and one of the other distinguishing features in it is I took a saw to this and I just opened up the outer bark so you can see that quite distinctive yellow inner area there. And that's a good ID tool as well. And you can see they get quite large. I've seen some as tall as 15 to 20 feet.
So this is glossy buckthorn. I took this actually up here on the upper left off of the internet, but because I think it's a really good description of those white lenticels on these three, different size branches. It's hard to tell the difference, and this is one of the toughest ones. But where at the chokecherry, the bark might be a little bit shiny, the lenticels may be a little bit longer, but they do look different. But it's a hard thing to tell. The foliage has a sheen to it. That's why it's known as glossy buckthorn. So does cherries. So very, very hard to identify. And I promise, if you really want to know what this looks like in the landscape, email me. I will come. We will meet and I will show it to you, because I just am so frustrated with this plant. I want people to get to know it and understand what it looks like. Here it is here that's gotten in the water. Look at it. It's growing. It can grow in all kinds of conditions, super wet feet, and it's quite large. And then this, which looks like a lovely path going through the woods, truly is lined with glossy buckthorn. Very typical. Once again, along the edges of things is where a lot of these invasives come in, and very typical place for it to grow. So one of some alternatives that we have are, one is Clethra, the sweet pepper bush. Now this grows quite large, oftentimes found near ponds and kind of wet areas, but some of the cultivars we've found have been incredibly adaptable and do better, pretty well in a little bit more dry conditions. There's also some of the cultivars are much smaller in size, 16 candles, and hummingbird are a couple that I can think of off the top of my head. And they're really suited for the home landscape. Beautiful fall color on it. Lower left here is bayberry. Good fruit set on that. This is kind of a semi-evergreen. On a mild winter, we may have some the leaves really persisting into spring. And don't be surprised, though, this is a big plant and they haven't been, there aren't a lot of cultivars that are smaller. So this can get quite large, but very lovely. And then one that's I'm finally kind of learning about and fallen in love with is this smooth witherrod, Viburnum nudum. This is a cultivar called Winterthur. There's another one called Brandywine. Beautiful fall colors, nice shiny leaf to it. And look at this fruit. Isn't that wonderful? They truly are pinks to purples. They're wonderful. And then a couple more. People love hydrangeas, but most of the hydrangeas we plant around the landscapes are non-natives. But here are two native ones. The oak leaf hydrangea is just, the fall color is magnificent. They can get quite large with age. They have this wonderful kind of peely bark. In the wintertime, they can be a little bit coarse looking because the leaves are so big. Once those come off, there aren't a huge number of branches, but it's an absolutely beautiful plant. And then this one is the smooth hydrangea. Hydrangea arborescens does really well in dry shade. Dry shade can be a very, very tough situation. And so they've got some cultivars with different shaped flowers now, and definitely one to be aware of. Okay, Michael.
The next invasive plant we want to talk about is Multiflora rose, Rosa multiflora. And it is, you see this mass of things. We've talked about the bittersweet already. Well, the rest of the thing that's around it is the Multiflora rose. Multiflora rose can get absolutely enormous. It is beautiful. It's got a lovely white flower. It is very fragrant, and it produces these lovely little rose hips right here that persist through some of the winter. Birds will eventually go after them, but it's a great ID tool. The problem with Multiflora rose is just incredibly aggressive. It can grow anywhere. It can also grow quite large, and it can create these massive thickets of rose plants. Birds love to live in it. It does give it them a little bit of protection, but it is a plant that is spreading far and wide and becoming a bit of an issue. And if you're going to try to do identification, what you should take a look at is the stem and oftentimes the fruit. That's going to be a really good clue for you. The stem is also a slight green color to it, especially the younger stems. Has a little bit of maroon tone in there as well, but the green with these small rose hips is your best ID. It oftentimes can come up in multiple stems, so in clumps from the ground, and you can see, I think in back there, hopefully you can see where the base of it is, right next to the euonymus, next to the bittersweet. It's coming up in a clump and will just grow up, and they can get upwards of 12 feet by 12 feet wide.
Okay, Multiflora rose. If it has something to grow up onto it, like some other roses, look at this, it kind of can climb up and almost become a climbing rose as well. So it's generally, if it doesn't have anything to climb on, it just turns into a huge shrub. There's a better picture of the little up close of the fruit. And then look at this upper right. I had referred to it as having a green color, but sometimes a maroon tint. This one was right around the corner from my house, and sometimes in the wintertime they can be quite red as well. So I wanted you to be aware of both those colors there, the green here and the red here. So let's look at alternatives. So we do have a native rose, Virginia rose. It's definitely one to consider as an alternative. Pink flower, but beautiful rose hips on it. So there's also a group of plants called Sweeta, the dogwoods. There's actually probably 4 or 5 dogwoods that are shrubs that are native to this area. This one is Sweeta cereceae, which is the red stem dogwood. And there's gray and silky, a number of them. This one is particularly fun because of these beautiful red stems that stand out quite distinctively in the wintertime. They like growing in wetlands, but they don't have to be in wetland. So fairly adaptable plants. And I had to put in high bush blueberry because everybody wants to go out and eat blueberries. They're wonderful. I find that this plant oftentimes doesn't have the exact soil conditions that will support it. It tends to need to have fairly low pH, and sometimes we don't have it the perfect thing. So sometimes people get frustrated. They say, I don't know what's going on with my blueberries. When they're happy, they're extremely happy. When they're not, it can be a bit of a bummer. And I think, Michael, we have the last clip.
When we're talking about removals of invasives, we could talk all day about it because each and every species of plant has a different way in which we could kind of look at the best way to manage an invasive. However, we've found that within managing invasives, one of the most important things is when you're trying to remove them is to not open the soil up. And that's what I mean when you have a piece of bittersweet, a small one, pulling on it and pulling it out by the roots can be very satisfying. That's a neat thing to be able to do, and you think, this is great. I'm just got rid of that bittersweet and I'm not going to have it back again. Unfortunately, it doesn't turn out to be the case. What happens is when you pull the roots out, what it does is it disturbs the soil. And in the soil is already a whole bank of those seeds. And so opening that soil and disturbing it just encourages growth. So you might pull out one, and next year you might have 10 in that same location. So we found that some of our best management strategy is just to mechanically remove it, and that's by cutting. So I'm going to show you the simple way. Here we have this euonymus shrub that we've been looking at. And the nice thing for this kind of plant, sometimes they can come up in small clusters of branches. This one happens to have a single stem to it. So I'm simply going to go down to the ground with my trusty dusty small saw. Done.
So many invasives. So we have covered the six other ones that we found within about a 20-foot radius right at Guernsey Sanctuary. We didn't have to go far, but I want you to be aware that, of course, there are many, many, many more, and many that are probably even worse than some of the ones we talked about tonight. One being Norway maple. They have so dramatically impacted some of our woods. It's kind of terrifying. They will change what's going on with the soil, and they will become a monoculture, and virtually nothing else will grow when a Norway maple goes to seed and goes crazy. As I told you before, privet here is becoming invasive. This one here is black swallowwort. This is just a nasty vine. It will grow up, it's tough as nails, it has a shiny leaf, it resists any kind of chemical control. You cut it and it just comes back like crazy. The worst part of it is that monarchs are drawn to it. It apparently is something that appears to them to be like the plant that they need, which is milkweed or butterfly weed. And they'll lay their eggs on it. And once the eggs hatch, they cannot feed on this and they will die. So I despise swallowwort. Another one is porcelain berry. Look at this gorgeous fruit. Isn't that beautiful? It's an amazing vine. Look at it. That is about a 3-year-old patch right at Brown's Field. So that's becoming more of an issue. And of course, one that literally we could spend an entire hour on talking about specifically is Japanese knotweed. We don't have the time to go into that, but I'm just going to touch on management here. And going back to the Japanese knotweed, this lower left-hand slide, this is the plastic that was put down on Fullabrook Park. There's a number of areas. I'm sure anybody who's walked the park knows what it is. We've been, asked multiple times, when's it coming out? I thought it was supposed to, kill the Japanese knotweed. It was put down with the hopes that it would, the black would help to solarize it, kill the roots underneath. Well, this picture comes right after a gully washer of a storm we had one a couple summers ago. Last summer, it lifted the plastic. We didn't get back to putting it down for a couple weeks, and within 2 weeks, the Japanese knotweed was already 2 feet high right there. So if we took the plastic up right now, we would have Japanese knotweed coming right back. So as it is for management, we are going to keep the plastic down for as long as it takes, and we don't know how long that's going to be. So it's a real issue. I'm a big fan of, these are my 3 tools that I use for almost all invasive removals or management. There is something called a weed wrench. Here's a picture of it. It's got a very long handle on it, which gives you a nice lever, and it will yank that right out by the roots. But as my clip said, doing that also comes with issues. So most of the time what we do is cut. We mow, we weed whack, we prune, we saw, we cut. And that's fairly successful for us, but it's something that we have to go back and do every couple winters. And the problem is we can only work on these in the wintertime. So it's very challenging. One other, and of course, chemical is always an option. It's probably the most effective option, but it's one here in Wellesley that we're trying desperately to stay away from. We don't want to use chemicals if we can manage in other ways. So this picture here indicates a cut, lower right is a cut, and it's dabbed. And this is a great way to do it because the dabbing puts down just a tiny amount of chemical right on where you've cut it. And if you do it immediately, it can stop that plant from sprouting again. But as I said, we try not to do it. So these are pretty much our tools and a lot of backbreaking work. So this just touched on a few things. As I said, refer to that sheet that you have access to about the native plants, but other wonderful resources. We are so fortunate here in Massachusetts to have the Native Plant Trust. They have a great website and they grow a lot of plants. There's also another one called Grow Native Massachusetts that you might want to check out. As a professional organization, I'm involved with the Ecological Landscape Alliance, which also is providing incredible information. So as Doug says, whether we like nature or not, none of us will be able to live long without it. So hopefully we can work together to recognize these plants and at least have an idea of how to possibly manage and to never, ever, ever make one of those again. So I've come to the end of what I wanted to say tonight. So thank
Cricket,
you.
amazing, so informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Want to thank you as well as Simon Glassenberg, who created the video for this, and also to Judy Barr, the Wellesley Conservation Land Trust board member who organized this and our other spring Zoom events. We will take some questions now. There are many that have gone into the chat box. I'll try to get through a number of them here, Cricket, if you'll stay for a bit. And also, just as a reminder, we will be sending out a link to this recording, Cricket slides, and a great handout that Cricket has made, giving both the invasive and the alternative in common and scientific names. So we'll be sending that out as well, and check on our website and Facebook page for any updates. So let's get to some of those questions, Cricket. Ray has asked, can you talk about trumpet vines and how can I stop them from invading my yard?
No, it's the same kind of thing. It's, these vines can run rampant. I believe it or not, it's considered a noxious plant, not an invasive plant, and it's just going to be mechanical removal. I don't really have any other great advice. I'm sorry.
Is Virginia creeper considered invasive? How do you get rid of it?
No, it's not. It's what you might want to once again call it noxious. The vines are tough. They can get really rambunctious. I find it very easy to manage. It is a big grower, but it's also fairly easy to cut and pull off of things. So I have not found it to be a big problem. When it's growing on the ground and creates a kind of a ground cover, I embrace that. I love that. I'm happy about it. It's the problem is where it's growing where you don't want it. Once again, it's just a lot of yanking and pulling. So.
Can you recommend some easy to maintain non-invasive shrubs to plant in place of an ailing Norway maple we took down?
Well, some of these species that we talked about, if you're talking about, did you say a Norway maple?
Yes, Norway maple.
And, those are, there's a lot of trees that you might be able to put in place. We weren't really here to talk about that, but there's a lot of native trees that could go in. Most of the oaks, we should be planting more oaks if we can. The problem is the Norway will have changed the soil underneath. And so they have such dense root systems and they suck a lot of nutrients out of the soil that cutting it down and and getting something in there right away might be a little bit challenging. Sometimes I would take a plant down and just try to add some decent soil in there for a while, not plant anything until we've got some decomposition going on, and then come back in. Sometimes, you got to be in this for the long haul. And sometimes we leave things without a lot of plants in them for in order to get the invasives and the problems under control first before we replant. So that's a possibility too. But there's many native plants out there that these websites that I talked about can help you with.
Great. There are a number of questions about Japanese knotweed that came up before you hit it, but since so many came up, maybe you can just touch on it again. How do you control it?
Yeah. So one of the things, though, and as I talked about in Fullabrook, we've got plastic in a number of areas down. In 2 areas, we're actually going in and we said, we're going to try to do this mechanically. We're going to stay on this and see what we can do. And there's one area in the section between Wellesley Ave and Brook Street that is quite moist, and the Japanese knotweed loves it. So we've gone in every 10 to 14 days and weed whacked it down to the ground. And we've done that for 3 years. And I can tell you at the end of 3 years, we've slowed it down a little bit. That's about all I can tell you is we've slowed it down a little bit. It's still there. I don't believe we're ever truly going to get rid of it. I think it's a long-term management issue. One thing you don't ever want to do is let it to go to flower. So it flowers in late summer. So if you can cut it at least a couple times during the year so that doesn't happen, that's a positive thing, because you don't want that to be producing seed. So,
Great.
and there's lots of crazy things. There's mesh that people put over it that kind of slows it down. It depends on your circumstances and how much you have and how much time you're willing to put into it. So.
Thank you. Elizabeth asks, I've read that Japanese barberry is also a haven for deer ticks because it runs warm in the winter. True?
I have never heard that. Fascinating. Don't know.
Okay. We'll Google it after. I've read that cultivars don't have as good pollinator value. Do you know if this is true? Carol asks.
Yes, Carol, I'm glad you brought that question up. I don't know that. Okay. There hasn't been good research done on that. They're starting to do more research. Dr. Annie White has been trying to look into that on the wildflower aspect of it. I'm not sure that sometimes some of the cultivars were actually visited more by pollinators than the straight species. So there's much to learn about that. And unfortunately, I can't, if we didn't use the cultivars of the natives, we would be really limited on what we can use in the types of landscapes we're trying to use them. So I'm going to say, I hope that that's not the case, but I still believe that putting in a native cultivar is better than exotics and certainly better than invasives. So I hope they're okay. I don't know that yet.
Okay, Lisa, I hope that also answers your question. Dory asks, how do you get rid of glossy buckthorn? I have a lot of them in my yard. And how about poison ivy?
Cut, really. The glossy buckthorn, truly, if you cut it every year, we actually can cut it now almost with the weed whacker, because we keep it small. The minute we stop cutting, it will resprout. It simply is. And as I've said before, we've tried pulling it, and that's caused more problems of opening that soil and encouraging the seeds that are already there to sprout. So we've found that the most successful, and sometimes like at the duck pond, we've got it growing in amongst the riprap, which is along the edge, and we can't pull it out because that would destabilize the banks. So just cutting is really our best option, cutting and planting natives and allowing, hopefully encouraging the natives to grow as big as they can and keeping the invasives as small as we can. So we've got some balance there.
Our friend Lori from the Weston Tree Advisory Group asks, how has Wellesley done any controlled burns to manage large areas?
We have not. I think they would be very upset with us. So we have not tried. And honestly, burning, I think is a fabulous way to deal with a lot of issues. The problem is, once again, you know, unless it was if it's just a controlled burn, it wouldn't damage the root system. So you'd still be having to do ongoing management with it because they would resprout, is my guess.
Great. I think we're reaching close to the end here. A couple more, although a few more just came in. Have you ever used horticultural vinegar? Would it be considered a pesticide or herbicide?
Oh, we spray vinegar everywhere. Yes, this is how we actually manage weeds that are in our patios and walkways and different things, because we're, as we said, we're trying to do everything organically. And so salt and vinegar is a good combination to desiccate things. But as far as woodies go, I think all that would happen is burning the foliage off, and they would just, because they're really good at growing, they're just going to put more foliage out. So I wouldn't think of it. I don't think it's an effective management tool for woody invasives.
Elena asks a good question, not only for our neighbors, but also our neighboring towns. Any advice to get more town involvement from our neighboring towns in addressing these issues?
No, I just want to try to deal with the issues in town, which feels very overwhelming. But it's a good thought, and we should all be thinking about it. I haven't gone down that road yet, though.
All right. I think that's it for the questions. Excellent. Thank you again, Cricket. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Judy. Thank you all for attending. I don't think we would have been able to fit in the Wakeland room at the library, so we do thank Zoom for these capabilities. As I mentioned, we will be sending out to everyone who registered a link to this recording within a couple of days, a link to Cricket's presentation, and a link to the handout. And then we'll also be putting it on the Wellesley Conservation Land Trust website and posting all to Facebook, social media as well. Thank you again, Cricket, and have everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Good night.